So, welcome back to our 40 Days in the Life of Jesus campaign. Really glad that you're tuning in. And if you've been faithful with us from the beginning, you know this has really been a remarkable journey. And we're looking at key events from the life of Jesus, or key days in the life of Jesus. And today we kind of come to this middle period. And it's a period that is really remarkable because Jesus, for the first time in his ministry with the disciples, is going to send them away or send them out on a mission. One of the reasons that they're called the apostles, to be an apostle is to be called, quote, a sent one who is sent is an apostle. And this is the first time that Jesus has sent them out. And we're going to look at that today in this event. And before we even get into the mechanics of all the things that Jesus said and did that day, one of the things that's going to be percolating in our minds is actually not something that the Bible records for us, but what it doesn't record. And what it doesn't record is how long they were gone for. We don't know for sure. We know that it probably wasn't over a 9-month period based on the other events that happened around it, but it could have been as many as 9 months. There is a period of that as the longest, and the shortest, maybe just a few weeks, but definitely more than a single week that they were out. The other thing that's really fascinating is what brought them back together. Did Jesus give some kind of instruction beforehand that's not recorded for us that said, come back and let's reassemble on this certain date? We don't really know what it was that causes him to come back. But what we find very interesting in the gospel accounts is that at the death of John the Baptist, they all reassemble with Jesus. And they're all present with Jesus by that point. And some have speculated, and it is just speculation, that maybe it was the death of John the Baptist that brought them back. Maybe that was the impetus. They all went back to be with Jesus. We can't say much more about that because the Bible really doesn't say much more about this topic, and without that biblical direction, we're just speculating on what might be. So let me take us away from speculation to something just fascinating, and that is what Jesus says to his disciples before he sends them out in groups of 2 on their first, if you would, missionary journey, or on their first mission that they're being sent on. And that is that Jesus outlines a model, a methodology for sharing good news with people in villages and communities. And in that, this model that Jesus has, it was based on, first and foremost, the way that Jesus had already been conducting his own ministry. In Matthew chapter 9, verse 35, we read these words: Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues. Jesus would go to the synagogues to teach, and what's really eye-opening to me is that this is also what we see the Apostle Paul do in the book of Acts. And, interestingly enough, Peter and John frequently are at not the synagogue, but at the temple. They go to the worship centers. Now, Jesus, when he would teach, it says, he would proclaim the good news of the kingdom. The message was the kingdom of God is at hand. It is near. God's plan is coming into action. And the third thing that it describes, Jesus teaching, proclaiming, and finally healing diseases and sicknesses. Now, Jesus is ministering to the people. The crowds are growing. And in verse 16 of Matthew chapter 9, we read that when Jesus saw the crowds, that Jesus had compassion on them. He had compassion because when he looked at them, he felt like they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. The imagery here is of a lamb that has been chased perhaps by a wild animal and has run very hard and then has been injured along the run. And they find themselves either out of exhaustion or injury lying there now helpless to save themselves any longer. And they need someone to save them. And when Jesus looked at the masses, that's what he saw. And in truth, when Jesus, I think, looks at you and me, that's what he sees as well. So Jesus knew at this moment in his ministry, it was the right time to expand the work that could be done and he chooses people to expand the mission. This time, the first time, is the 12 disciples or apostles. Interestingly enough, in just the next chapter, we will read the sending out of 72, an even larger group of believers that he sends out. Well, here we read what the mission is that they go on. And he was motivated by the need of the crowds, but the mission is simply this. In verse 37, Jesus said, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into the harvest field." This was the mission Jesus had. He was asking them to think about the harvest that needed to happen, the people that needed to be saved before something happened to them, right? The lamb that couldn't help itself, that needed someone to rescue it soon before they were attacked and destroyed. The wheat or the corn or the beans that are ripe for the picking, and they need to be collected before they rot on the vine. This is the kind of thing that Jesus is calling them to. And so as he says, it's urgent that we be about this mission to go out to the people. And so once that he has now declared, showed them the example of how he does ministry, he's showed them why it's important that they go out and why these lambs need help because they're harassed and they're helpless. He's shared that it's a harvest, that it's the right time for this action to happen. Now Jesus will confer on them power. He doesn't just give them a mission and no ability to accomplish it. He doesn't just give them a mission and say, all right, pull up your own bootstraps now and make this thing happen. He gives them a mission, and then he also confers on them the authority and the power to carry it out. Listen to what it says in Matthew chapter 10, verse 1. Jesus called his disciples to him, and he gave them authority. Authority to drive out impure spirits, to heal every single disease and sickness that they encountered. And they will encounter sickness and disease. What's interesting is that the miracles that we hear about these disciples doing and the actions where they do these things, most of those things we learn about specifics when they are serving after Jesus has ascended to heaven. But they do have a general report that they give where they say, hey, we have healed the sick, we have cast out the demons, we have overcome evil. And in Mark chapter 6, verse 6, we read the words that after they came back, that it says they drove, in verse 13, they drove out many demons, and they anointed many sick people with oil, and they healed them. And so they spread the good news, and they healed people everywhere that they went. So where did they go? Well, this is another fascinating part of the story, and I want to say this clearly because there is some misunderstanding that happens sometimes about Jesus and his ministry and who he ministered to. Now, there can be no mistaking that the primacy of Jesus' mission before his resurrection was that he was a fulfillment of the Old Testament Messiah, and that he was coming to bring Israel back to God in every way that needed to happen, or to pull them closer to God. Or if you want to say this in a different way, he had come to fulfill the law. And in fulfilling the law, he had come in a way then that would make peace with God and with this nation and with these people. But not just with Israel. And during Jesus' ministry, he does reach out to other people. Certainly there is the evidence of the Roman centurions not once but several times that Jesus interacted with and does miracles and healing. Not only the centurion, but also the Canaanite or the Syrophoenician woman who Jesus also ministers to and helps. So there were others. Jesus wasn't so blinded by nationalism that he didn't help anyone else. That's not an accurate portrayal, although there are those who would attempt to portray Jesus that way. But Jesus is fulfilling God's plan and God's promises to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And so God is faithful to make sure that everyone is, if you would, without excuse, because they've all had the chance to hear about God's plan and God's kingdom. So he gives them these directions, and he does tell them at this point, for those he's sending out, not to focus on the Gentiles or the Samaritans. And again, Jesus ministers to both of those groups. But he tells them, go to the lost sheep of Israel. God is faithful to keep his promises. He wants not one to perish. And Jesus has already said they are like sheep that are exhausted. They've run the long race, and now they desperately need someone to rescue them before they are destroyed. So Jesus is sending out rescuers. And as they go, he says, this is a reminder of what you're to do. First, verse 7, as you go, proclaim the message, the kingdom of heaven comes near. Heaven is near. The time of God's choosing is upon us. And then he gives them these other directives. Heal the sick, raise the dead. And we have no instance of that until Acts recorded for us. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but we don't have any instance where it's recorded until the book of Acts in terms of the disciples. Cleanse those who have leprosy and drive out demons. And here is the context of Jesus' words. Freely you have received, freely give. Jesus has done this incredible task of working and sacrificing for the disciples. And now they also will work and sacrifice for Jesus and for the lost. Now he has an interesting statement about urgency. And it comes to play in his words. Don't go out and get any silver or copper to take with you in your belts. Don't get a bag for the journey or an extra shirt or sandals or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep. In whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person. Stay at their house until you leave. If you enter a home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town. Shake the dust off your feet. Truly, I tell you, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. For I am sending you out like sheep among the wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes, as innocent as doves. And be on your guard, for you will be handed over to the local councils. You'll be flogged in the synagogues. On my account, you'll be brought before the governors and the kings as witnesses to them and the Gentiles. But if they arrest you, or when they arrest you, he says, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time, you'll be given what to say. For it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Now, there's so much there that we could get into, but it is important to understand the idea that the very gospel scriptures that we have today, they came by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. This message that Jesus had told them would happen, that you will not have to worry about what to say. God will give you the recollection. He will give you the ability to remember what to say and to do. It is fascinating he uses that word shrewdness here. If you were following on the Sunday sermons, you know that this past Sunday, we talked about the shrewd manager that Jesus commends. And I encourage you, if you've not heard that sermon yet, to go back and to take a listen to that sermon. It is a fascinating sermon, and it has bearing on this comment where Jesus says, listen, be wise and understand the urgency of the moment. Well, of course, there's more to this story, and how this story kind of comes to its end in verse 40. It says this, remember this about those you're going out to. Anyone who welcomes you welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Understand this, Jesus is one who was sent. His disciples are going out now for the first time as ones who are sent. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but understand this, that following the Great Commission, all Christians act as those who are sent by God into the world to seek and to find the lost sheep. Well, anyone who welcomes Jesus, he says, welcomes the one who sent me. And whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet receives a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And if anyone gives even a cold cup of water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, truly I tell you, that person will truly not lose their reward. Jesus is speaking to them there, and he gives them kind of a prophetic look that there will be those people who will receive the message with gladness, just like there'll be those who oppose them. And have faith that there will be those that choose the right thing. There will be those who embrace you and care for you in ministry and help you along the way. It was a hopeful message to his disciples, and it's still a hopeful message to us. We live in an age of skepticism, and there are many who doubt. There are many who make fun of faith and religion and in Christians in the age we live in. But be encouraged. God is a God who knows all things, and his promises, there will always also be those who hear, who believe, and who are saved.